Why I like Houston, there's a lot of filmmakers in Austin. It seems to be where everybody went, but I like a little bit more of a city.
What if the love of your life became a global icon, just as your world quietly fell apart? He was a $6 million man, unstoppable, untouchable. She was America's golden girl, radiant, rising, unforgettable. But behind the red carpets and magazine covers was a marriage unraveling in slow motion, not from scandal, but from silence. And when she left, it wasn't just with another man, it was with his friend. This isn't the Hollywood romance you think you know. This is a haunting story of how fame gave them everything, and quietly took it all away. Lee Majors, best known as the indestructible $6 million man, was once part of one of Hollywood's most glamorous and tragic love stories with Farrah Fawcett, the woman whose beauty and charm would define an era. Before they were icons, they were just two aspiring actors navigating the ruthless entertainment world. Lee, born Harvey Lee Urey, had made a name for himself in the Big Valley and exuded a strong, stoic presence that made him a casting favorite. Farrah, a radiant Texan with a dazzling smile and magnetic energy, was steadily climbing the modeling ranks in Los Angeles. When they met in the late 1960s at a party through mutual friends, their chemistry was instant and electric. Lee was already a star, and Farrah was on the brink of breaking through. Their marriage in 1973 seemed like the perfect union, a strong, quiet man grounded in loyalty and traditional values, and a vivacious, rising star with undeniable allure. Lee's role as Steve Austin catapulted him into pop culture history, while Farrah's early work in commercials and print laid the groundwork for her imminent superstardom. Despite their hectic schedules, they cherished their connection. But as their careers gained momentum, the very fame they dreamed became the wedge that slowly pulled them apart. While Lee was consumed by long hours filming, Farrah's own rise accelerated when she joined Charlie's Angels in 1976, becoming an overnight sensation. The red swimsuit poster that sold over 12 million copies made her a cultural icon, but her skyrocketing fame came at a steep cost: her marriage. Farrah became engulfed by offers, endorsements, appearances, and the demands of fame. Lee tried Hold On, asking producers to adjust her schedule just to share meals together. But Farrah declined, determined to maintain her independence. Their time together dwindled to a few fragmented days per week, not enough to sustain the intimacy they once shared. Lee's values, rooted in loyalty and emotional presence, clashed with the whirlwind that stardom had brought into their lives. Farrah was no longer just his wife. She was now a global symbol of glamour and freedom, and Lee found himself quietly sidelined. The emotional disconnect widened until something irreversible happened. Farrah entered into a public relationship with Ryan O'Neal, a man who wasn't just a fellow actor, but also once a trusted friend of Lee's. The affair, which began before her divorce from Lee was finalized in 1982, devastated him. He reportedly found out like the rest of the world, through tabloid photos and television gossip. This betrayal hit harder because of the deep trust he had once placed in both Farrah and Ryan. Lee never spoke publicly about it, but his silence became a form of heartbreak in itself. He disappeared from her life, avoided the spotlight, and guarded his personal world from further pain. His grief was not expressed through interviews or headlines, but through his retreat into privacy. Even as Farrah and Ryan's tumultuous relationship continued to play out in public, filled with reconciliations, breakups, and tabloid drama, Lee maintained a dignified distance. He dated others, but never seemed to fully recover from the emotional fallout of his marriage. Friends described him as kind but distant, always carrying the ghost of a love lost. Farrah remained in the limelight, often unfiltered, her personal highs and lows documented for the world to see. She wore her scars openly, while he chose to carry his quietly. In the early 2000s, a glimmer of potential reconciliation emerged when a mutual friend suggested a private, off-the-record meeting between the two. Farrah was reportedly open to it, softened by time and reflection. Lee hesitated, admitted he missed the person she used to be, but ultimately declined. It wasn't out of anger. The pain simply ran too deep, and the door had long since closed. When Farrah was diagnosed with aggressive cancer in 2006, she bravely chose to document her battle in a raw, emotional documentary, laying herself bare for the world one final time. Lee never reached out publicly, never attended her events, or made grand gestures of support. Yet those close to him said he was devastated, following her condition quietly, grieving from afar. When she passed in 2009, his brief statement praised her strength and spirit, calling her an angel on earth and now an angel forever. He didn't attend her funeral, choosing instead to mourn privately, not from indifference, but from a place of pain and closure that had been building for decades. Throughout all of it, he never blamed her, never attacked Ryan, and never tried to reclaim the narrative. Instead, he stayed respectfully silent, a man who had once loved deeply and suffered in silence. Farrah's legacy lived on through her iconic image, bold independence, and later critical acclaim as a dramatic actress. Lee eventually remarried in 2002 to a woman outside the Hollywood sphere, finding peace in a simpler, quieter life. Still, Farrah remained a defining heartbreak of his life, the first great love who left a wound that never fully closed. Their love story was not one of happy endings or dramatic reunions, but two people swept up in the tides of fame, ambition, and misaligned timing. And while the world may remember them in photographs and nostalgia-soaked tributes, those who looked closer understood the deeper tragedy. A love that was real, intense, and ultimately undone by forces neither fully controlled. Lee Majors never publicly forgave Farrah Fawcett, but perhaps the truth was more complicated. Maybe, despite everything, he never stopped loving her. Lee Majors, known to the world as Steve Austin, the indestructible hero of the $6 Million Man, was the image of American masculinity, strong, steady, and successful. His rise to fame made him a household name, his action figure gracing toy shelves and his face splashed across lunchboxes and magazine covers. But behind that tough exterior was a man deeply committed to the idea of love and loyalty. When he met Farrah Fawcett in the late 1960s, she was still relatively unknown, a vibrant young model from Texas with a dazzling smile and natural magnetism. Their introduction at a casual Hollywood party sparked a connection that was immediate and undeniable. He was reserved and grounded. She was radiant, effervescent, and full of promise. Their energy was complementary. He offered stability. She offered inspiration. In many ways, it seemed like destiny had brought them together. By 1973, they were married, a match made in Hollywood heaven. At that point, Lee's star had already risen high. Thanks to his work in the Big Valley and the breakout success of the $6 Million Man, Farrah, meanwhile, was still building her path, doing shampoo commercials and magazine spreads, slowly capturing the attention of casting directors. Lee supported her ambitions completely. In interviews, he often praised not just her beauty, but her determination and intelligence. He seemed proud to walk alongside her into the spotlight. The couple became staples on red carpets, celebrated for their chemistry and looks, frequently hailed as the embodiment of glamour and romance. But what the public didn't see was the increasing strain fame was placing on their personal connection. As Lee's career demanded long, exhausting hours on set, Farrah's ambitions continued to expand. Her unique blend of all-American beauty and charming confidence made her a favorite in the entertainment world. When she landed the role of Jill Monroe in Charlie's Angels in 1976, everything changed. Practically overnight, Farrah went from being Lee Majors' wife to a cultural icon in her own right. Her image, immortalized in that now legendary red swimsuit poster, became one of the defining visuals of the decade. She wasn't just famous, she was omnipresent. Farrah Fawcett was now a brand, a movement, a fantasy for millions, and the face of female independence on television. While millions celebrated her rise, the dynamics at home were shifting. Lee, despite being no stranger to the demands of fame, was left trying to hold on to a relationship that was beginning to slip through his fingers. The couple's schedules no longer aligned. Days passed with little communication, their once solid foundation becoming fragile and neglected. Lee reportedly tried to coordinate their time, even reaching out to Farrah's showrunners in the hope that she could adjust her shooting schedule to have dinner together. It was not a controlling gesture, but a plea from a husband yearning for intimacy with the woman he loved. But Farrah, increasingly independent and wary of being seen as dependent on her husband, declined. That decision, however professionally motivated, widened the already growing chasm between them. Lee began to see less and less of his wife, not just in terms of time, but in emotional presence. In his words, he'd only see her 2 days a week, and even those brief moments were hurried and fractured. The intimacy and partnership that once defined their marriage had been replaced with brief, disconnected encounters. The Farrah he had married, sweet, grounded, and Texas true, was evolving into someone new, someone shaped and defined by the unstoppable current of celebrity. Lee wasn't resentful of her success. In many ways, he had cheered her on from the start. But fame, as it so often does, had transformed not just Farrah, but the language of their relationship. They no longer understood one another as they once had. Despite the emotional distance, Lee held on. He remained committed, hoping that somehow they could weather the pressures that came with celebrity. But then came betrayal so personal, so raw, that it ended whatever was left of their connection. In the late 1970s, tabloids exploded with photos of Farrah holding hands and attending events with Ryan O'Neal, an actor Lee knew well. They weren't just colleagues, they were friends, part of the same circles. Lee reportedly found out about the affair the same way the public did, through glossy spreads and magazine headlines. There were no warnings, no explanations, just photos and silence. What made the affair even more painful was its visibility. Farrah and Ryan weren't trying to hide. Their appearances together were everywhere. To the media, it was a sensational love triangle, the golden girl torn between two Hollywood icons. But for Lee, it was something far deeper. It was humiliation. It was a collapse of a marriage he had invested his heart in. It wasn't just the loss of a wife, but the public betrayal by someone he had once trusted as a friend. There were whispers that Farrah and Ryan's relationship may have begun while she and Lee were still married, though that timeline remains unclear. Regardless, for Lee, the damage was done. True to his nature, Lee Majors did not retaliate in the press. He didn't air dirty laundry, didn't assign blame, didn't engage in a public spectacle. Instead, he did what few in Hollywood are capable of. He withdrew. He quietly disappeared from her orbit. No public statements, no bitter interviews. He simply stepped away. To outsiders, it may have seemed cold, but to those who knew him, it was a protective measure. The silence wasn't out of malice. It was a shield. By the time their divorce was finalized in 1982, their lives had completely diverged. Lee focused on his work, starring in The Fall Guy, a successful series that kept him in the public eye, but never quite recaptured the cultural dominance of the $6 million man Farrah, continued a relationship with Ryan O'Neal, a romance marked by highs and lows, breakups, reconciliations, tabloid rumors, and emotional turbulence. While Farrah's personal life played out in full view of the public, Lee chose the opposite path. He remained in the background, quiet and elusive. For nearly 20 years, Lee stayed single. He dated occasionally, but never married, and friends noted a distinct shift in his demeanor. He was still warm, still respectful, but guarded. It was as if something essential had been damaged, a vulnerability he chose never to expose again. When asked about Farrah in interviews, he gave respectful, often vague answers. Once, when asked if he watched Charlie's Angels, he admitted he didn't, because it was just too painful to see her. Farrah, meanwhile, evolved into a more complex public figure. She fought to be seen as more than just a pretty face, taking on dramatic roles that earned her critical respect. Her emotional transparency was starkly different from Lee's guarded nature. She didn't shy away from her scars. She wore them on her sleeve, even when the world watched her stumble. Her relationship with Ryan O'Neal remained central to her public life, despite its volatility. But perhaps the most poignant part of their story came much later, in the early 2000s, when the possibility of a quiet, private reunion was discussed. A mutual friend reportedly approached both Lee and Farrah separately with the idea. It wouldn't be for the cameras, just a chance to talk. No scripts, no spotlights. According to sources, Farrah was open to the idea. Time had softened many of the old wounds. She had once loved him deeply, and some part of her was curious to see what remained. Lee, on the other hand, hesitated. He thought about it. He admitted he missed the woman she once was. But in the end, he declined. It wasn't anger or bitterness. It was self-preservation. The emotional toll of seeing her again, of digging into old wounds, was simply too great. Not long after, Farrah was diagnosed with a rare and aggressive form of cancer. She approached her illness with remarkable courage, choosing to document the raw reality of her battle in a video diary that later became a documentary. It was her final act of vulnerability. Stripped of glamour, stripped of fame, just a woman facing mortality with dignity. The world watched, heartbroken. Tributes poured in. But one voice remained absent, Lee Majors. He did not issue long statements. He didn't appear in tribute specials or attend public events in her honor. But those close to him insist the silence wasn't born of indifference. Lee had been aware of her illness from the beginning. He followed her progress quietly, his grief kept behind closed doors. He had already mourned her, long before the world did. His heart had broken years earlier, and opening that door again was simply too painful. When Farrah passed away in 2009, Lee released a brief but heartfelt statement. She was an angel on earth, and now she's an angel forever. It was respectful, elegant, and final. He did not attend her funeral. Some saw that as cold, but others understood it as a final note in a song that had ended long ago. For Lee, grief had no audience. Eventually, he found peace. In 2002, he remarried, this time to someone far removed from the Hollywood spotlight. It was a quieter life, a more stable chapter. Friends say he was happy. He had let go of the chaos, the heartache, the spotlight. But the shadow of Farrah never completely disappeared. She had been his first great love and his most painful loss. Farrah's legacy, too, endured. Despite personal ups and downs, she continued to fight for artistic respect. Her final years were marked by bravery and emotional honesty. She became a symbol of strength in the face of suffering. But the story between her and Lee remained unfinished. No public reconciliation, no final meeting, just memories, silence, and the bittersweet residue of what might have been. Today, when fans look at old photos of Lee and Farrah, dazzling in love, walking red carpets hand in hand, they see a snapshot of time before everything changed. A beautiful couple caught in a flash of cameras, framed in youth and promise. But behind those photos is a deeper truth, that even the most golden love stories can crack under the weight of fame, ambition, and heartbreak. Lee Majors never spoke ill of Farrah. He never told his side of the story. But in doing so, he said everything. His silence was not bitterness. It was reverence, and perhaps even love, because the woman he never forgave may have also been the one he never stopped loving. Lee Majors and Farrah Fawcett weren't just two stars passing to the golden age of television. They were a symbol of love, loss, and invisible weight of fame. Their story isn't one of villains and victims, but of timing, transformation, and the emotional cost of living under a spotlight. Lee never slandered. Farrah never explained. And maybe that silence says more than words ever could. Some love stories don't end with closure. They just fade into memory. If this story moved you, let us know. Drop a comment, share your thoughts, and subscribe for more untold chapters of Hollywood's most unforgettable lives. Next week, we revisit another relationship that burned just as bright and ended just as mysteriously. Because behind every perfect photograph, there's always a frame you never got to see.